Hi, everyone, and good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. We're going to be talking about cloud backends for front-end developers. We're going to be using a few popular technologies. We're going to try and go through this pretty quickly. This is a 300-level session, so we won't talk about in detail about how we implemented everything. We want to talk about the big picture, the architecture decisions that we made. This is Ana Cunha. She's a senior developer advocate with AWS. My name is Memo Doring. I'm the head for developer relations in LATAM. And enough about us. Let's get into what we're going to talk about. So usually when we talk about creating full stack apps or web apps or native apps, there's three main buckets where we can put all our activities: building, shipping, and scaling. So we're going to use those three as a mental framework for what we're going to be doing. We tend to operate, or at AWS, we tend to talk a lot about big companies. If you saw any of the keynotes with Werner Vogels or any of the other ones, we're talking about some very large enterprises where they have multiple teams that are working on different pieces for one single app. But we also know that many of you are freelancers or hobbyists, or you're working on your weekend project, or you're the one developer at your company. So what we want to do is we want to move away from one-stop shop, not because we're telling you need to go work with a different team. We just want to get into a mindset where there's different profiles or personas that are deploying or are working on different pieces, and you have the right tools as that individual to work on that. It doesn't mean, if we talk about this, it doesn't mean, oh, a single person can't do it, but we want to separate some of these tasks and responsibilities, even though it just might be a hat change, right? Like you're the designer in the morning and you're the infrastructure person at night. You can be the same person, but we want you to be thinking about those as separate activities and not commingling them. So we're going to start talking about designing, building the components. So this is what we would feel is inside the build space. And I'll let Ana talk about that for a little bit.
All right. So when we're building a full stack app, we have two parts. We have, So we have the user interface, which is whatever we see when we're on our computers or on our phones. And we also have the code that connects to the user interface. So usually we have different technologies for creating the UI components and the code that's going to add some smartness to those components. So for building our app, we have UX designers working on sorry folks, having a hard time with the clicker. So we have UX designers working on the UI part, and we have developers working on the code that's going to deal with the UI part. So usually front-end developers. And to build the front end, we have UI designs, and then the developers are responsible for making those designs into code that can be run on our browsers, on our mobile phones. We can use a bunch of different technologies here, but a very popular one right now for creating UI components, UI design systems is Figma. And another one that we can use for our code on the front-end side of things is React.
And we pick those two because they're popular and there's many people using them. We're not saying this is the only path or they're the right tool for everybody. We just had to pick something as an example.
Yeah. And if you want to make your Figma UI components into usable React components, you can use AWS Amplify Studio for that. So this feature was launched last year during Werner's keynote by Alice Pittle from the Amplify team. And the way you do it, you go into your Figma file, you copy the URL for that, paste that on Amplify Studio, and then you get those UI components with nice, readable React code that can be extensible as well. So right now, we want to show you a little bit of that. This is our Figma file. It's very simple. I'm not a designer. But the idea behind the app, I'm trying to learn Spanish as part of the LATAM team. I'm from Brazil, and something that not everyone knows is that we speak Portuguese and not Spanish. So I'm trying to learn Spanish to communicate with our other customers across the region, and I like using flashcards for that. So the way that I usually do it, I have a single phrase, and then I have a recorded sound that I do with Poly, and on the other side of the flashcard, I have the meaning of that phrase. So I've been using NKDeck for that, but I thought we could use Amplify to recreate that and try out the different AWS technologies.
And we also needed an excuse to build an app that we could show you. The app could be whatever in this workflow. We just chose something that Anna had already built.
Yeah. And then with those Figma components, we can make them into React components using AWS Amplify Studio, and then use them on a React app. We can extend them. For instance, we have the buttons over there, so I can just say that the sign out button will sign me out, and then someone else needs to log in. Same thing for the create deck button. So I'm not constrained to the original component that the AWS Amplify created for me. And then this is an example. The front of the card, I have a phrase. I haven't had breakfast yet. And then on the other side, I have the meaning of the main thing I want to learn with that phrase. In that case, is desayunar. It's like have breakfast, right? Yes. Memo can correct me if I'm wrong. And with the play button, then we have Polly just say that phrase for me using Mexican Spanish.
And we built all of that using Amplify. So we added the Polly support. We added authorization using Cognito. It's using an S3 bucket to store some of the files. It's got a GraphQL endpoint with AppSync. We did all of that workflow just using Amplify through the CLI, through different tools. It's just an Amplify regular workflow. And we're not going to show all of that because it would take the whole session to just talk about it. And we wanted to take that and move one step or a couple steps further with that.
Yeah, let me just show you real quickly how that looks like. So just focusing on the front end right now. Good, I got that right. Phew. So this is my Figma file. And I have the components that I've created here. And then to import that into AWS Amplify, I just need to copy the link and then head to Amplify Studio under UI library. I'll paste that link over there, and I'll have my components. And from here, I can configure them and assign a specific component to a data model that we have on the backend. So pretty straightforward.
Yeah, and then full disclosure, this works with React and Figma right now automatically, so that we chose the easy path, but you could use any tool and use Vue or a different tool to create your front end. We just kind of picked whatever was the quickest for us, but I truly believe that engineers and designers, good engineers and designers ship, so I'm not here to fight about what the best tool is or your favorite programming language. We just picked something at random, but you can abstract out and think this is just JavaScript and it's just a design tool.
So going back to the backend that Memo just mentioned, we use both Amplify to create the UI components, the React UI components automatically, but we can also use Amplify to create the cloud backend that's powering up our application. So Amplify is a service, it's a library, it's a framework, a bunch of different tools that we can use for different purposes. And if we only want to use part of it, we are free to do that as well. In our case, we use Amplify both to create the front end and the back end of our application. Amplify does a bunch of things, and it tries to abstract away whatever AWS service is behind it. Not even us that work for AWS can keep up with the number of services that we have, but we know we want our application to have authentication, to have geolocalization, to have predictions. So Amplify tries to make it as easy for us as possible.
And some of these names are a little more generic, but if you're doing voice, it's Polly. If you're doing API is API gateway or AppSync. If you're doing GraphQL, if you're doing databases, it's DynamoDB. It's all the services that you know and love from AWS. And under the hood, what's happening is it's actually using CloudFormation as a provider to create all this infrastructure for you. So it's just a layer of abstraction on top of regular AWS services, regular the regular CloudFormation workflow. You could go into your account, see the CloudFormation stack, and roll it back, delete it, do whatever on it if you wanted to.
Everything's there. So these are the ones we are using on our specific application. We added a GraphQL API. We can see the DynamoDB tables that are the data source for that API. We can see the AppSync config. It's just trying to make it easy for us not have to think about the specific AWS services behind it. So to build the backend, we used the Amplify CLI, which is one way you can do it. So you just run Amplify, add, and whatever category you want to add. So for auth, we did Amplify, add auth. And then you have some basic configuration that you need for each different category. For auth, we are using the default one, and then you can select if you want your username to authenticate with your username, your user to authenticate with your username or an email address. And then after you're done with that, you just run Amplify push, and you send the local change that you made through the CLI to your app that's running on AWS.
Yep, and something that's really nice about Amplify here is then you can just grab a single line of code, wrap your entire application on authorization flow, and it'll pop up a login and create user, log out, everything will be there for you. Very, very straightforward. So that's one of the benefits of Amplify. That's why we're talking more of a front-end development workflow, and then we're going to move on to some of the other stuff. And I guess the spoiler there is the extensibility part that we're using with Amplify is what we're going to be talking about in a minute.
If you really like the CLI, like the both of us do, you can use that. But if you're more of a UI kind of person, you can use Amplify Studio to do exactly the same thing. So it's up to you. Some specific categories, more advanced stuff, can only be done through the CLI, but authentication, data, APIs, storage, user management, that can be done through Amplify Studio. And something else we have powering our app, pretty much the most important part, is the data. So we ran Amplify add API. Then you can select between a REST API or a GraphQL API. You can optionally add a authentication to get to your API. So we're just saying that just logged in users can access our API. You can enable things like conflict detection. And then you can start off with a schema that Amplify provides for you and change that, or you can create your own, which is what we did. And then once you add it to your GraphQL schema, you just run Amplify push, and it will send your changes to the cloud and automatically generate the code for your API as well. And again, if you're a visual person, you can do all of your data modeling through Amplify Studio.
And at this point, we've built our front end using React and Amplify, and then we've built our back end, and we're using Amplify Studio or the Amplify CLI to do that. But it's very much a small workflow. So I can do it myself. I'm deploying. I'm doing everything, but it's all kind of self-contained. It can be very fragile. It can be easy to break what you're doing if you're going quick, if you're making changes last minute before your talk. I'm looking at you, Anna. So things can start exploding, and we wanted to add more of a professional approach to this, or maybe we want to integrate. We're part of a team, and we already have an infra team, so we wanted to start integrating into that and moving away from just doing everything ourselves.
Yeah. So the problem we started running into when we were working on this talk is that I was making changes, Memo was making changes, but we had to keep track of each command we were running on the Amplify CLI or each change on Amplify Studio, and that's not fun at all. Yeah,
and then we would end up with basically forks of the same app that were close, but it was like, oh, my API is REST, your API is GraphQL, we're Bork now. Someone needs to backtrack 2 hours and add something new, right?
Yeah. And whenever you're adding something, you're doing a CloudFormation deploy, you're updating your stack, and that also takes some time. So right now we have our app running locally with the backend deployed to the cloud to a specific AWS account. But the next step is to get our app out into the world.
Yeah, so we want to have users, right? Like that's the whole point of building an app, a web app, whatever it is. We want to have people use it. They get some benefit out of it. Maybe we make the new billion-dollar startup, but if we can't put it in front of users, we can't do that. You can do that just with Amplify. You can just publish to a specific domain and have your nice web page and everything through that. That workflow is there. But again, we wanted to take it one step further.
So usually when we're shipping an app we have someone that's writing the code, testing the app locally, and then we have someone else that's responsible for setting up that infrastructure on the cloud and making that available to, hopefully, millions of users.
Paying users.
So we just told you that to write our code, to come up with our app, both the front end and the back end, we used AWS Amplify. And to set up our infrastructure in a repeatable way, that's not me just pasting a bunch of Amplify CLI comments into Memo's Slack chat, we are using AWS CDK, or Cloud Development Kit.
So the Cloud Development Kit is a tool that allows us to treat our infrastructure as code. So we can write, there's other tools that have been called infrastructure as code, but most of the time it's YAML or JSON, which is not necessarily code. CDK is Python, Java, TypeScript, so you can pick your favorite. If you like YAML, there's other tools for that. If you like JSON, there's other tools for that. This one's more directed to more traditional programming languages, and you can do things like have conditionals or for loops or more advanced logic attached to it. But what it allowed us to do with a new feature is we can export what we created in Amplify, the backend that we created with Amplify, export it, and then we can pass that into the CDK and have CDK deploy it. So we could have an environment, and this is where the solution we ended up with, where I could be writing code, build the new version of the app in my local dev environment. I could deploy it, test it, do everything. And then when I was ready for it, I could hand it off to Anna through CDK, and she could deploy it to our production environment. And then we're not clashing. I'm not deploying to production every time I make a change. And we started finding more benefits of doing this approach that we'll talk about in a second.
Yeah. So we use Amplify both for our front end and our back end. If you are familiar with Amplify, when you go into the AWS Management Console, you see that you have the hosting part for the front end. You connect it to a Git repo or a zip file on S3, and then you're hosting your front end. But then you also have a different tab where you have your back end with all the different categories, API, data, whatever you want on your app. So we split this up into shipping the back end using CDK and then shipping the front end using CDK. So we have the backend components that were created by Amplify when we ran the Amplify CLI commands, and we have AWS CDK that we want to use to deploy those automatically and not just rerunning a bunch of commands every time on different machines or different AWS accounts. And to do that, last year, Amplify launched support for exporting the backend configuration that you created with Amplify. So you just need to run the Amplify export command. So that's a way for you to get all the backend configuration that Amplify sort of magically created for you and have that in a way that you can deploy to different AWS accounts, share it with different people.
And I think that's a really important point. We actually have two accounts. We have like our developer account where we're doing testing and whatever we want to do. And then we have a whole separate AWS account that's our production infrastructure account, and that's where it's getting deployed in. We're just passing in parameters. It's a mirror of the same infrastructure. It's a mirror of the same app, but we've got them completely separated. One of the benefits of using infrastructure as code with any tool that you want, Terraform, Pulumi, CDK, is that you can treat your infrastructure the same way you treat your code, and you can commit it to a GitHub repo, you can roll it back, you can diff it, you can find what's happening, and then say, okay, this was the last working version before Memo decided to start mucking about. We can roll back to that really easily, and we can actually see how it's progressing, right? Like these were the different changes. Hopefully there's some good commit messages there, so you know what I was trying to do a Friday night with a beer in my hand. And we wanted to get that benefit into Amplify as well. So even though it's generating this infrastructure for us, we wanted to also capture all those little changes and details.
So after we run Amplify export, Amplify will generate a folder with the CloudFormation templates that it uses originally, so we can use that on our CDK project. So we're going to use the CDK exported backend library that now supports CDK version 2, which is
Oh yeah,
really good
that's,
as well.
it's not fully announced, but it's available now. So you can use CDK version 2 with Amplify exports as of a couple of days ago. So if you've been playing around with this, that's a pretty big deal as well.
Yeah, because up until a few weeks ago, we were working with CDK v1, which was kind of frustrating, and now Amplify export supports CDK v2. So then you create your new Amplify exported backend from those files. You set up your environment name, and then you just let CDK know what's the path to the folder where Amplify put all the information that CDK needs to redeploy that backend. So I think right now we can show a little bit of that, right? OK, so let me show you here. So we have the flashcards app, which is our front-end app that was originally created using the Amplify CLI. And the way to do it would be Amplify export. And then you specify the folder where it's going to live. So in this case, the folder for CDK project. Apparently, I already have that folder there, but OK, let's overwrite it. And it lets you know all the categories you have on your app, everything that will be exported to CDK.
And you'll notice that every time you run an Amplify command, it'll remind you, like, you're adding authentication, you have storage, you have an API, so it's clear to you what's happening, what's changing, what's staying the same.
So this is the folder that Amplify brought into our CDK project. So you can see here all the different categories that we added. And the way that we did to deploy it using CDK is with this 4 lines of code using the CDK exported backend library. So you just say your environment name. In our case, this is the prod environment, because the dev environment is the one we created through Amplify CLI, and the path to that folder with all the backend stuff.
Yeah, and an added benefit for us was that we, with CDK, we were using TypeScript. With React, we were using JavaScript, so we could kind of stay in the same language world for everything that we were doing. It's not a requirement. You could kind of pick and choose whatever you were doing. But for us, since we were pretty familiar with that and we were both working on both pieces, although Anna did most of the heavy lifting, we stayed within the same programming language family.
OK.
So now after we've shipped the backend, right, like we can push that backend up to the cloud, we have that infrastructure. We still need a way to push or to publish our front end. So that's the next step we took. And in a normal workflow, you have your developer that's working on the front end code. We already chose this path to go down with CDK, so we want to get that into the CDK as well and make the most out of a single workflow. We didn't want to start forking and have multiple workflows and add unnecessary complexity. We could, but we try to keep it as simple as we could. And even then, it grew and grew as a solution as we went.
So to do that, Amplify also has a specific CDK library. And so if you're familiar with the differences between CDK v1 and CDK v2, CDK v2 put all the different AWS services into a different library, so we don't need to be installing them individually. The Amplify one specifically is still on alpha stage, which means they could make breaking changes. It works, but it's liable to breaking changes, so you need to install that one separately. So we're going to import that specific library, and then we're going to create a new Amplify app. We can use different Git repos here, so you can use co-commit if you want to do that. You can use GitHub like we did, and then you just need to configure who's the owner of your repo, the name of your repo, And then you also have a GitHub token with specific permissions for CDK to get access to that code. And then you specify if you want multiple branches, if you want a single branch to be deployed, you can do that as well. OK, let's show that code too. So this is where we are using CDK to deploy our front-end app. So we're calling it flashcards app. Right now it's on my repo, and we have this GitHub token here. This is something else that we're going to get to, but for now, we are able to use CDK to deploy the backend that was exported from Amplify. So we have all the AppSync stuff, DynamoDB, authentication with Cognito, predictions with Poly, all of this with the Amplify backend. And now we have our front-end code as well that's on GitHub being deployed with CDK too.
So that's another nice benefit. We now have a repo where we have everything, and we can just point CDK to that repo and say, go grab that, go deploy that, and we can just get all the benefits of in our case, we use GitHub. It could be GitLab. It could be whatever Git provider that you wanted to use.
That Amplify supports.
Yeah.
But I think it's, I don't know, 4 or 5?
Yeah, and even
Bitbucket.
It could even be a zip file
on an S3
bucket. I wouldn't recommend that if you're going very quickly. But if you like to live dangerously, I'm not going to stop you.
OK, so we were pretty happy with what we've did so far, because we were manually creating things through the Amplify CLI or Amplify Studio. And now we are able to deploy to a whole different AWS account without having to redo any of the hard work we had.
Yeah, and we basically solved our issue of, like, it works on my machine. We got to that point. It worked everywhere. If it worked, it worked. And it was easy to replicate. I could tell Anna, like, here's my Monday morning, like, I'm done working, it works, and she could just grab it. It would work for her. Anna usually is based out of Brazil, and I'm based in the States. So time zones and all of that, we could still collaborate pretty well. And we had a bunch of benefits, again, rolling back and seeing breaking changes and all that stuff. But we felt there was still more to be done, because we're still deploying manually. We're still we didn't have a good way of having something automated to build. I would keep forgetting, like, oh, I have to type this in, or is it npm start, is it npm build, just because, like, we're going quick. So we figured the next thing that we could do, that we could add, was a CI/CD pipeline. And we already had our code in GitHub, and we know GitHub Actions are very popular. So what we decided to do is move into GitHub Actions and do that.
Yeah. For instance, the Amplify export command that I just showed you, whenever we had a change on our front-end app or on our dev account app, we would need to re-export all of that and then redeploy with CDK. So a lot of manual steps still going on.
Yeah, moving around files, which is not what you want to be spending time in. Like, oh, I did export, but I didn't copy the folder into the right place. So my changes aren't getting deployed. I don't know, what am I doing wrong? You forgot to copy the files. You keep deploying the same thing over and over. It's never going to change. That kind of scenario.
Yeah, so Memo challenged us to take this to the next level. I was pretty happy with what we had up until that point. But if you're not familiar with GitHub Actions, you set up a workflow that's triggered by a specific event, and that could be whatever. Could be a pull request, could be a push on a specific branch, could be someone opening a new issue. And then that will trigger a job. A job has multiple steps, and each of those steps can either run an action, that's something that someone made available on the GitHub Actions marketplace. So there are actions for checking out your GitHub repo, because this is something a lot of people had to do all the time. So someone created an action for that, and we can just reuse that. There's an action for setting up your AWS credentials, so you don't need to do that every time you set up a new action that needs access to your AWS account. But besides actions, you can also run scripts, and we ran a bunch of them.
Yeah, so I spent a whole night banging my head against the credentials stuff with AWS, and then the next morning Anna's like, there's an action for that. Why are you doing it the hard way? And I was like, oh, OK. I just wasted 4 hours of my life for no reason. So the actions are very powerful. Some of them are published by companies or groups or whatever you want to call it. So it could be like GitHub, it could be AWS, it could be some other provider, software as a service provider or a tool provider. There's others that are just regular people that have built them and published them. One cool thing is that by definition they're open source, so you have to make the code public for you to go look at it. So if you're concerned with security or reliability or anything else like that, you can go click in there and share it with your security team or do your own reviews or whatever. So there's minimal risk when you're using them because you know exactly what's there. Obviously, your mileage may vary, and I'm not a lawyer, so don't use anything that you're not allowed to. And then what we did is once we ran out of actions that we could use to do what we wanted, because we were pushing the envelope, there wasn't a lot of what we wanted to do already out there. We started writing shell scripts. So I was
a lot of fun.
yeah, a lot of staring at Linux commands and thinking, why isn't this working? It should be working. Oh, you forgot a $sign somewhere, and so it's not a variable, it's a string, that kind of thing. But and we'll show you all of this, exactly what we did. But this is the basic workflow: an action, a few scripts, another action, and that got us to a point where we could export everything from the Amplify, get all the assets in a S3 bucket, just kind of ready to deploy. And then the next step that we did.
Yeah, I mean, with GitHub Actions, if you want to get real fancy too, you can have multiple jobs inside the same workflow. We didn't do that, but we just wanted to let you know. So this is the setup that we have. So we have the application repo on GitHub, and that is updated by either me or Memo when we are running commands on our Amplify CLI or when we're doing things on Amplify Studio and pulling those changes locally. So we have the React front-end code, and we are interacting directly with Amplify. And the idea is to have an infrastructure repo with AWS CDK code, with an AWS CDK application that is able to get the exported backend from Amplify and deploy it automatically, and the front end as well.
Yeah. And so what we did is there's an action to trigger a different repository. So we had 2 GitHub repos, one for each of the things that we wanted to do. We have one for the app, and there we could just do, basically it's our dev environment. Every time that we change anything, we're committing to that repo, and then we can grab that, and locally it works. We don't have to wait for like a long build process or anything like that. We can just work on that very, very quickly. And then when we're ready for that, we can also run that command repository dispatch and dispatch a different repo on it could even be on a different GitHub account for all that matters, as long as you have set up the permissions properly. And then that one actually runs and deploys to our infrastructure account. So one is working more locally, and the other one is doing the deployment in a more proper and structured way.
So we set up 2 GitHub workflows, one on the application repo and one on the infrastructure repo. So for the application repo, whenever we have a push to the main branch, we run a job that checks out our repo, so there's an action for that. Configure our AWS credentials, there's an action for that as well. And then it will pull the Amplify app, that's where we had to write a lovely shell script.
Yep.
It will run that Amplify export command that we just showed you, and then it will trigger the infrastructure workflow so we can deploy everything here using CDK. On the infrastructure side of things, we are not triggering the workflow based on pushes. We are triggering the workflow using the GitHub API. So you call the GitHub API with a repository dispatch. We're doing the same thing, checking out the repo because we have our CDK application there, configuring AWS credentials because we're running CDK deploy from there. We are downloading the Amplify exported backend files. So the first workflow uploaded those files to S3, and the second workflow is downloading them so it can be used by CDK.
And that's where we had to make some decisions, like we push it up to an S3 bucket, and do we do a pre-signed URL? So we can pass that pre-signed URL to the other repo, and it's got just a small time to live, so it'll just grab them, and we know there's no way of leaking those out. Do we give the first repo access to a S3 bucket on the second account? So we had to make some decisions there, and you're going to have to think about what your security mindset is and how. If we had, let's say, credit card information there, we're going to treat it one way, and we're going to be way more mindful about it. Here, it's just a demo application, so we were comfortable with a pre-signed URL that lives for a few minutes. And if someone somehow got access to that pre-signed URL, they could technically download all our app for those 5 minutes that the URL was active. There's no data there. All the data actually lives in the database, so we really wouldn't care about that. But again, there'd be different ways to manage this that were more secure and more hardened. We just chose one that was secure enough. We didn't go in and just say admin access to everything for everything and cross-account access. Security is still job zero, so we chose something that was mindful enough for us and for our scenario. And I guess we haven't mentioned this, but all these workflows are written in YAML, and we can show you a couple of the workflows and what they look like in our GitHub accounts.
So after our CDK application has access to the CloudFormation templates that were exported by Amplify, so it tells you things about your application, but it's not, we don't have endpoints there because it's just a CloudFormation template. It just gives you a general idea of the backend of your application. So we're running CDK synthesize to make sure our stack or application runs all right. And then we are running CDK deploy on a whole different AWS account. So completely different from the one where we originally created the Amplify app. So now let's dig into those two workflow files, right? Nope. OK. Let me show you the front-end one first. So
you'll notice that one of the first things that we do is we say what OS we're running it on. So we're saying Mac OS latest. It could be Linux, and I think they have a Windows one as well. It's GitHub, so I'm sure they have a Windows one. So we just chose Mac OS one day after I was really frustrated with errors. We were using Linux, and I was getting just this super generic error. And in one of those, like, just throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks moments, I changed it to Mac OS, and I was like, I hope all the commands I'm using match. And they did, and the error that I got was like super verbose, and it was like something dumb I had done. I was like, this is incredible, this is the best. So we didn't move back to Linux, but it's just like something that very specific that happened to us. And it was nice because we just had to change one word to go from it's being deployed and built on Linux to it's being deployed and built on Mac OS. Very, very simple. So that's really, really cool with GitHub Actions.
Yeah, and the first thing we set up is when this workflow is going to run. So for the application repo, it will be whenever there's a push on the main branch. So here is our actual job with a bunch of different steps. So this is the difference. When you're using an action, you just say use this, and then the name of the action that you're using. So the checkout action that downloads all the files you have on your repo, that's created by GitHub themselves. And the configure AWS credentials, it's made available by AWS. For here, we use the GitHub repo secret to store our AWS credentials. The most ideal way to do this would be using OpenID Connect, which you can also do using this specific AWS section.
But we're still using a secure component within GitHub to reference all our credentials. So we're not pushing our credentials into the repo at any point. Our secrets aren't vulnerable or anything like that. We could take it, again, we could take it one level higher and use an OpenID Connect and then have our GitHub account connected to our AWS account and go this way. Another reason we coded it this way is because we're going to make this available to all of you, and this makes it a little bit more modular because we don't have to tell you, go connect your account. We just say, create the secret with this name. It's still secret. You can still run it. It's and a lot of what we did is we tried to made this as modular as we could, so it would be helpful for someone else. We didn't just want this to be like a demo that we talked about. We want you to go break it and play with it.
Yeah, and GitHub also doesn't make the secrets available to anyone who forks your repo. It doesn't print them out on the console when you're running the workflow. So
yeah, we also found about that the hard way. So we were like, why are these not here? They were there, but it masks them. So every time we try to print them out to make sure that we were pulling the right thing, it was masking them for us. So security is good, but it kind of tripped us up one day.
And after you configure AWS credentials, you can run any AWS CLI command those credentials have access to. So here we are running an Amplify get app, so we can get the name of our app. This is something that we need to pull all of the app information from AWS. And then we also learned some cool stuff, how to set up environment variables on GitHub workflows. We are installing Amplify. And this is where we had to
we had to get a little creative because we started hitting the limits of what we could do within the specific YAML commands, the run commands. So what we did is we created a shell script, and we used a command to run that shell script so we could do a couple more things. And that's the shell script right there. The limitation that we hit is that a lot of these configuration parameters have escaped white spaces, and we couldn't do that directly from YAML. Or at least I couldn't do that. I'm not saying it's not possible, just my YAML skills. I hit the ceiling with my YAML skills. So this is how we did it. But the cool thing is we figured out it's powerful. It's a powerful enough tool that we just found an exit hatch, did it this way, worked really well. I guess my favorite feature from the actions is that in the names you can add emojis. So we decorated them appropriately.
So if you're familiar with Amplify on the Amplify CLI, when you run Amplify pull, it will ask you a bunch of questions about your project. Are you using VS Code? Is this a JavaScript project? Are you using React as a framework? So this is all the configuration we had to do on this shell script, because this is not an iterative shell.
Yeah, so it's not an interactive shell, so we had to give it all the commands ahead of time. There is a headless mode for Amplify, but full disclosure, we found a few bugs with it, so that's why we use this approach. We have cut tickets to the Amplify team to get that fixed, but this works because you're basically not using the headless mode, and you're simulating that interactivity through a shell script.
So after our GitHub workflow has access to the configuration for our Amplify app that was deployed on the first AWS account, we export the backend. We zip it, and we send it to an S3 bucket. We also, like Memo mentioned, we're signing this S3 file. Like we're getting a pre-signed URL, and we're sending that as input to the other workflow that we're triggering.
So we're using the GitHub API to trigger that other repository, and we're passing it a parameter, which is here's the URL for the S3 bucket with the files that you'll need to actually run this.
So this final step is where we're using the GitHub API to call the other repo. So you need a GitHub token. And for this, GitHub has new fine-grained access tokens. So we can create one specifically for a repo, for specific actions, and we use that for here as well. And for the payload, we are sending the pre-signed S3 URL, and that's how the other workflow has access to the exported backend. So here, same thing, checking out the repo, configuring the AWS credentials, now downloading the S3 file from the URL that we got when this workflow was triggered. And then we are just installing the CDK app dependencies, synthesizing our CDK application, and deploying it in a way that you don't require approval as well.
Yeah, something that was also very nice about this is that every time that you're deploying, you have a brand new blank environment. So we wouldn't run into issues where I did something else for a different piece of work where I'm using some experimental CDK version or an experimental Amplify version, I forgot to roll it back, and suddenly it doesn't work. This way we had that consistency. Like if it works in the pipeline, it's going to work everywhere. We could very specifically say this version of of npm or this version of this package that we're using. We could set it up and have that level of consistency, which at the beginning of the project was not there and was pretty much the whole crux of why we decided to go with this.
So let us just show you real quick what it looks like on GitHub.
Yeah, and we wanted to show you the whole pipeline running, but it takes about 10 minutes to run, so we opted not to bore you out of your minds. But it is pretty fun when you've made a bunch of changes and you hit run and you're like, please, 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 and then you get all those green check marks and it's...
Especially when those changes were 1 hour ago.
Yeah.
So you can see from either from the green check mark, you can go to your the action that just ran, or you can go from the Actions tab as well. So over here, you get to see whatever the output is for all the things that we did. So checking out the code for the repo, configuring the AWS credentials, getting the Amplify app name. So you can see here that's not showing any of the AWS account credentials.
Yeah. And we could have done this with something like code commit or any other CI/CD tool. We just chose GitHub Actions, just like we had Figma and we had React, and we didn't want to stay within the AWS ecosystem entirely. We wanted to push ourselves to use as many external tools as we could to simulate what we believe customers do out there, right? Like we don't think everyone just goes all in with everything AWS and gets it tattooed on their chest, like me. And so that's why we chose GitHub Actions. It's nothing that we did here is limited to just GitHub Actions. Obviously, we can't just lift and shift what we did to code commit. We would need to change some of the stuff. But again, we wanted to push ourselves to be as close to real world as we could.
Yeah, you could use CDK pipelines as well if you're already doing that. We just wanted to mess with GitHub Actions. And then on the other repo, so the actions on this repo, they are triggered by the GitHub API call that's being made by this one, right? So it's not when we have a code change on our CDK app. It's actually when we have a code change on our original.
And for example, right now we have it set up for every push to run the whole thing, and one triggers the other one. That's overkill, right? Because I'll make changes to the workflow, and I push the changes. Like there's nothing there to do. It'll just it kind of loops one time around. We could optimize this a bunch, and right now we're using the free tier for GitHub Actions. Even though we hammered it pretty hard, I think you ran out of credits yesterday, but they start there every month. So today she magically we obviously planned that. We knew this from the start. But again, we hammered it really, really hard. We had it on push. We're pushing constantly, and even then, we had enough for what we needed.
They'll give you 2,000 minutes a month. So last night I got a message, you're almost running out of, but it will reset tomorrow. So lucky for us, that worked. So this one is being triggered by the API call. So I tried making this API call from my terminal. It works as well. We just set up the other workflow to do that. So then here is where the magic happens. So this is where CDK is deploying both our backend and our frontend. And CDK won't make changes if we haven't had changes to our backend too. So that's also, the first time you run it, it's like 10 minutes. The next time are a little bit less.
And you'll see there, each one of the lines has how long it took to run. So that's the step that takes the most. It takes about 5 minutes. But all in all, it would take 7 or 8 minutes, which for a 1 hour talk, it's 10%.
And then you get to see the stack here. So we have one stack for the front-end app, and we have another stack for the
different account.
This is the different account. I'm sorry. This is the infra account. And we also have it logged me out. But we also have the app account. So these are different AWS accounts. They are in different regions as well.
And again, we could have faked it. We could have had everything in a single account. We're trying to push ourselves to a more real-world environment, because that's what we wanted to show with Amplify. How do you go from this is just a hobby project to now it's something repeatable? It's something that's like I have an infrastructure person or I have a DevOps person on the team, I can work with them. They're no longer like, oh, man, was just the Yahoo that's building this thing, and like, how are we going to integrate this? How are we going to build any resiliency around it? Or, KS engineering, whatever you want it to take it later. This sets you up in the right path, right? And that's where we kind of came up with the idea of like, they might already be using GitHub Actions. Let's integrate into that.
So one thing we had to do as well is to change our front-end app to use the backend resources that were deployed using CDK. So we did that through the environment variables. Let me see if I can find them here. OK, so we have the environment variables that CDK is getting. Let me show you the stack. So we're just setting them up here and specifying the build spec for this Amplify front-end app.
Which was pretty cool because we were working with some pretty bleeding edge technologies, right? Like you were Figma importing into React and the cloud and Amplify and setting. And then a lot of what we also did was just like pure Linux scripting at the same time in the same project. And at least I don't usually get to combine those things at the same time. This was pretty rewarding to work on that, and especially because we managed to ship it.
And the cool thing about doing this with CDK is that you don't know what your GraphQL API endpoint will be when you're deploying it, but you can just reference it, right? So you can reference things from your authentication stack, from your GraphQL API stack, and that just works. See, here they are. So CDK is passing to the Amplify front-end app all the environment variables over here. And we have our app that was deployed to a different AWS account.
And then the final step that we talked about was scaling our components. So going from, we could build something, we could ship something, now how do we scale it? And we talked about these 3 steps already, but we wanted to be able to change our infrastructure as needed, give whoever was our developer or designer as much freedom as they wanted. We didn't want to lock into any one thing, right? Like this pipeline should work. Someone should be able to go back all the way to Figma, change a component. Now we no longer like blue and we want to go with red, and that should all flow through together and not have these silos or barriers.
So Amplify launched some really cool features last year where you can override the defaults that it has for the different categories. So for instance, if you do Amplify add storage, it won't enable versioning on your S3 bucket, but you can do Amplify override storage to enable versioning if you like. So you're not constrained to the defaults that Amplify uses.
And you can also go the other way, like back from what we're doing, and you can take CDK components and pull them back into Amplify at that stage as well. So it's kind of a back and forth.
So this is how you would override an Amplify generated component. So you would just say versioning is enabled. And something else that Amplify can do, if you want to use something that's not in one of those, 15 or 16 categories that we showed, you can add custom resources either using CDK or CloudFormation. So you're just going to run Amplify add custom, and it will ask you if you want to use CDK or CloudFormation. We are more like CDK type of persons. And in this case, we want to create an SNS topic, which is something that you cannot do with Amplify. So we're just going to create an AWS CDK stack that does that. So some of this is boilerplate code that Amplify puts there for you. So it's getting your information about your Amplify app, but then you just configure the SNS topic, and it will be deployed as part of your Amplify app. So if you want to go beyond what Amplify allows you to do with Amplify add auth, Amplify add predictions, and so on and so on.
Yeah, so I think we came to the conclusion that there's so much that you can do between CDK and Amplify. It's the more you can combine it, and we've got it deploying on one way, but you could also add your custom events. It's going to make it way more powerful for you. It's going to allow you to deploy more complex applications, and maybe in the future, something that you had to add manually or use a custom command for CDK, is going to be rolled out by the Amplify team, but you don't have to wait for them to do it. You can do it today. So you got these really powerful tools that you can start combining. And it doesn't mean you have to start there. You can slowly but surely mimic what we did, which is we just had an Amplify project, then we had some CDK with that Amplify project, then we had CI/CD with it, and then you can keep going on and on and on and add more of that. I think sometimes when we talk or we go attend a conference, it's like, oh, CI/CD or nothing, and it's very black or white. I think scales of gray are way better. So pick whatever you'd like from what we did today, try to implement that. It doesn't mean that this is all or nothing, or you have to do what we're saying. We're the owners of the truth. It's what we want you to do is to do it yourselves and play around with it. And like we said, we're going to share the code. We might have broke it this morning, so bear with us. Play with it tomorrow night.
Feel free to open a GitHub issue.
Yeah. Open issues, open PRs. We want to take this a little bit further and do as much as we can. That is an ugly emoji.
Yeah, so we are Mac users, and when we come here, they use Windows machines, so it changes our emojis. Memo was very frustrated about that. But the idea is that you can do it yourself, and like Memo mentioned, if you want to create your entire backend using only CDK and not use Amplify for that, you can do that as well, and then just use Amplify for your front end. Feel free to do whatever works for you. But if you want to make use of the way that Amplify lets you set up cloud resources quite easily with one command line, then you can export it to CDK afterwards when you want to take it to the next level. So here we have the application code and the infrastructure code. These are two separate repos. Feel free to fork them, open issues, leave feedback, send pull requests. We would love that.
Yeah, and we left a couple of minutes, so I think we have time for 2 questions. If you have any questions, shout them out. I'll repeat them so everybody can hear them, and we capture them. And before that, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for being at reInvent.
Thank you.
We hope you learned a lot. If you're shy and you don't want to shout out a question, we'll be right out here. And if you want to chat, talk about whatever.
We also have stickers, so if you stick for a couple more minutes, I can give you some stickers.
Anna will bribe you with stickers right before I remind you to fill out the survey for the session. All the feedback helps us. If you want to reach us on Twitter, if it still exists, that's where you can find us.